I'm Conor, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands, the only podcast dedicated to the finer points of face punching. And boy, do we have some fine face punching to discuss today. We are going to be talking about Mendes versus McGregor almost exclusively, unless we happen to run out of things to say, which doesn't seem likely because there are a lot of angles from which to approach this fight. Before we jump into the discussion, let's get on with the introductions. I am your host, Conor Rebush, and with me is Patrick Wyman. Pat, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty dang well. Stoked to talk about this fight. I mean, it sucks that we lost Aldo McGregor, but Mendes McGregor is a damn fine fight, and one that presents a whole lot of interesting questions for us to explore.
It's pretty much the only thing I've been able to say about this fight is it's no Aldo McGregor, but it's the second best fight you could make in the featherweight division. And there's not really much to complain about with that. I really would have loved to see Aldo McGregor, but I find it very difficult to complain. I love watching Chad Mendes fight. Obviously, I love watching Conor McGregor fight. Their styles match up in an absolutely interesting way. So I'm looking forward to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a fun fight.
Well, on this first segment, there's a lot of, as I said, a lot of ways we can approach this contest. But in this first segment, Pat and I thought we would talk about sort of the evolution of Conor McGregor. He's a very different fighter in some ways. In some ways, he's the same guy that debuted, that shocked the UK MMA scene with some very impressive performances back in Cage Warriors. But in other ways, he's a very different man from the one who knocked out Ivan Buchinger, 3-4 years ago?
Yeah,
and
coming up on 3 years ago.
That was a good guess. Just a lucky guess. I got nothing in front of me. I'm not prepared because that's the kind of guy that I am. Conor McGregor, he's evolved. Now, there's an important note that I want to make about the word evolution. And this is for scientific people as well as for MMA fans. People have this idea that evolution implies that something is always improving. The latest evolved form of a thing is inherently better than the older form, objectively speaking. And that's not necessarily true. What evolution means is change, and most importantly, it's a process of adaptation. And I think Pat and I both agree that some of the changes that we've seen in McGregor's game have been adaptations both to his own mentality, the kind of performances that he's had in the octagon, and the type of opponents with which he has been faced. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, it does. I mean, from a strictly evolutionary biological perspective, most mutations do nothing. Like they're just there. They have no fitness effect, positive or negative. Then there are deleterious mutations, and deleterious mutations tend to weed themselves out fairly quickly because, again, they're bad for you. Like they don't like if an animal has an evolution that evolves in such a way that it makes it more easier for their predators to spot them. They're much less likely to survive. And we see the same thing in combat sports. What we have is a vicious laboratory for evolution. And I think that McGregor, in particular, has evolved in ways that suit the new environment in which he's found himself, and both in terms of opponents and more literally the environment in terms of the space of the cage. I think he has evolved his game to suit the bigger cages that he finds himself fighting in. And what he would call flat-footed opponents, I wouldn't necessarily say they're flat-footed, but guys who come from a style that is more or less centered in Muay Thai and traditional boxing.
There's nothing wrong with flat-footedness. That's a myth that's got to die. Sometimes you want your feet to be flat on the ground. Sometimes Conor McGregor puts his feet flat on the ground.
Yeah, but I think the guys that he calls flat-footed are not actually really flat-footed.
No.
Like that's my beef with Conor McGregor's use of the term flat-footed and what he means by it.
In what other ways would you like to slander Conor McGregor today, Pat?
Oh, I have many. But first and foremost, No, I think like we need to make it real clear at the outset, just because McGregor is such a polarizing guy that we don't think that Conor McGregor sucks. In fact, we both think he's really good, but neither one of us thinks that Conor McGregor is an untouchable god. And conversely, neither of us thinks that Chad Mendes is an untouchable god, nor that Chad Mendes sucks. We think they're both really, really good fighters, and that's what makes this a really good fight. It sucks that it's that you have to put a disclaimer like this in here, but such is the passion that McGregor tends to arouse on either side of this debate that it's almost impossible to have a rational conversation about him with MMA fans.
Well, and we would have been giving the same disclaimer had we still been talking about Aldo McGregor by the time, because the way with, and I hesitate to use a term like this, but it's fanboyism, and it permeates combat sports fandom and sports fandom in general. I assume I'm not much of a sports fan if it doesn't involve face punching, but there's this weird thing where I'll share an anecdote with you. My buddy Lee Wiley, who does excellent boxing analysis, recently said on Twitter that he sees some similarities between Tyson Fury, who is now set to fight Vladimir Klitschko for the lineal heavyweight title. Great fight. He sees some similarities between Tyson Fury and Riddick Bowe. And I think that's a pretty good comparison. We have a big, tall guy who has an unexpected fondness and ability for infighting. Good uppercuts, uses his height well at close range. You'd expect him to be the boxer, but he likes to mix it up inside. And I was like, okay, good. I look at the responses to this tweet, and of course they are, did you just compare Tyson Fury to Riddick Bowe? LOL, you're an idiot, shit like that. Because you can't make... to a certain type of fan, you can't make an objective comment. You can't analyze a thing or give an observation without just without appearing to deliberately insult the opposition of the person you're complimenting. And the flip side, if you say something bad about them, you are a hater.
Yeah, it's a ridiculous situation, and it's one that I think people like us analysts tend to I don't know. We tend to get a lot of stupid tweets from people on exactly that note.
A lot of great tweets too.
Yeah, we have. I would say by and large, our audiences are fantastic, and I really enjoy interacting with most of the people with most of our audience. But at the same time, we get some real stinkers. Like I called Jose Aldo. And I would back this up. I will back this up to anybody who challenges it. I think Jose Aldo is pretty easily the greatest defensive fighter in the history of MMA. But that doesn't mean that you can't hit him. It doesn't mean that he's never going to get knocked out. And most assuredly, that didn't mean inherently that Conor McGregor wasn't going to beat him.
If I can venture a guess, was one of the responses to that claim a GIF of Aldo being hit in the face?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Because if he gets hit in the face, he can't be good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay.
Precisely.
We won't talk too much about that, but we just want to give you the idea. That's not what we're going to be discussing today. We're going to be trying to view both Conor McGregor and Chad Mendes, two fantastically skilled fighters, both with their limitations and their boons. We're going to be trying to view them as objectively as possible and taking a look at this fight. Conor McGregor, first of all, why don't you pinpoint what you see as one of his evolutions or adaptations? I think you mentioned the size of the octagon being much bigger than that in Cage Warriors. Do we know what the size of the Cage Warriors cage is?
I would bet that I doubt that it's any bigger than 25 feet.
It definitely appears at least no larger than the WEC cage.
Yeah, the WEC cage is 25 feet. The UFC cage is 30, the standard UFC cage. And I think that McGregor has had every one of his UFC fights in the big cage. Mm-hmm. So the big adaptation that I see is the increased use of spinning kicks. And McGregor, most of the time, is not really trying to land those spinning kicks. McGregor is instead trying to use those to cut off his opponent's motion in one particular direction, to force his opponent either to move backwards or to move back to the left side into McGregor's power hand. And in so doing, McGregor can slowly but surely stalk you and cut off your angles and force you backwards toward the fence. McGregor is a pressure fighter. McGregor has always been a pressure fighter. And what McGregor does, and McGregor has always done his best work when you back up towards the fence. That doesn't mean that he is incapable elsewhere. There are some pressure fighters who literally can't get anything done out in the middle of the ring or the cage. McGregor is not one of those. He's perfectly capable elsewhere, but still his overarching idea of what he'd like to do is to get you with your back to the fence, and where he can just go to town, where he can unload combinations like he did to Dennis Seaver in the last minute of the first round, where he threw 35 strikes in that minute. Wow. Which is insane output.
So, at least 15 of those in like one combination burst.
Yeah, I mean, that is like when Conor McGregor gets you backed up to the fence and you're shelled up, he's like Nick Diaz on every performance enhancing drug known to man. You know, like he's going to hit you over and over and over again. He's not going to get tired, and he hits a lot harder relative to his competition than Nick Diaz ever did.
Definitely.
So that's what the spinning kicks are for. You know, we're going to see some talk about this in the lead up to the fight, but that's the point of that. They force you backwards and they force you back into McGregor's left hand.
Now he can land them. I mean, the thing is, if you stand there and get walloped by a kick, it's not going to work out for you. I recall one instance in particular when Diego Brandao took a spinning wheel kick to the chin. A spinning hook kick, wheel kick, I don't want to mix terms, but he took a wheel kick to the jaw, and it seemed to stagger him momentarily, whether it was a slip or he was hurt, but it landed. So, you know, obviously the kicks, you know, and I'm sure McGregor has put a great deal of training into them, but the main purpose is kind of like a jab, right? Like a jab has a lot of purposes besides landing. You can use your jab without landing a single one in the entire fight, because the threat of it, the fact that it blinds you, the fact that it tells the opponent how far, or that fact that it tells you how far away your opponent stands from you, the fact that he reacts to it. If he's not getting hit by it, then that's probably because he's reacting to it defensively, and so that opens up other opportunities. So, you know, the spinning kicks are very much like that. Yes, if you get popped in the face with a jab, it will bloody your nose or cut your lip or knock your head back, but it has many utilities besides hurting you. And the spinning kicks are very much like that. And they're just, those spins are just one of many, I think of them kind of as footwork cheat codes. I don't think that Conor McGregor is a great lateral mover. I don't think he moves laterally. Like, his footwork is not incredible. He's got some really nice small steps. He uses hop steps really well to throw these back step left hands rather. And that's good. But he really uses a lot of like footwork cheat codes where, like, the spinning kicks, the opponent's not going to run into them, so they back up in straight lines, and it prevents them from outmaneuvering him and avoiding his pressure. And the fact that he likes to throw these left hands from the inside angle, he doesn't really make those angles all the time so much as he does just let the opponent go the way that they always want to go. Orthodox opponents are always trying to move to their own left, to the southpaw fighter's right, away from his left hand. And because McGregor has such long reach, he can just like basically punch across his own body before he even gets his feet into position and really capitalize on those inside angles when the opponent just gives them to him. And so I don't think we see a lot of McGregor really outmaneuvering his opponent so much as we see him forcing his opponent to maneuver in the ways he wants them to.
Yeah, I kind of disagree with that a little bit. I really do think McGregor, when he wants to, has very, very good lateral movement. Like when he was really laying into Max Holloway in the first round of that fight before he popped his knee, there were a lot of times where Holloway would try and get off the fence, and McGregor just kept him right in front of him there. Did not ever let up with the pressure. So I just think that McGregor sees less use for that. I think he thinks it's cooler to throw spinning kicks than to keep that crisp footwork. And also, again, I think that a lot of that has to do with the space of the cage. That a 30-foot octagon is a huge space. It's a huge space to cover. And if you're not the fleetest of foot guy, which McGregor is not, like I think that's important to note. McGregor is a plus athlete, but McGregor is not an absolutely outstanding, like, he's not Chad Mendes or Jose Aldo.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I mean to say. He's not superbly light on his feet when it comes to the lateral movement and stuff like that. He can definitely put himself in there and makes an effective blockade. He puts himself in the right positions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, he's not tremendously fast, and when you have that much space, Think about how much volume of space a spinning kick with your leg almost fully extended allows you to occupy in the cage. That's a huge. I mean, we've talked about this before with pressure fighters and looping body punches, or pressure fighters and body kicks. Like we talked about this with Chris Weidman, or pressure fighters and low kicks, and the way that allows you to attack space and not just to attack a specific. And not just to attack us on a specific line, a specific target. Spinning kicks are exactly the same concept. They're a great tool for a pressure fighter. We've seen that with Vitor Belfort when he goes into pressure mode as well. So what those spinning kicks allow McGregor to do is take away that space. When he uses those straight line kicks, those kind of hopping kicks, those hopping side kicks to the thigh, hook kicks, things like that. Those again have the effect of taking away space, pushing his opponent backwards, getting them toward the fence where McGregor can get off with his really get off with his left hand.
Yeah, definitely. I think I agree with every bit of that. And I'd like to talk about you mentioned something that kind of seems like just a silly comment in passing, but the fact that spinning kicks look cooler than footwork, I think really kind of seems to lend a pretty important insight into McGregor's game, because this is part of why everyone has this idea that, you know, the mutations, the changes are always pushing you towards the better. And while he uses those spinning kicks very well, I think we should also note that I think Conor McGregor likes looking cool, and that's part of the reason why he gravitates towards certain techniques as well. You know, he definitely fancies himself like a Bruce Lee style fighter. You know, he's how much more have we seen like the low horse stance with the long hands, like the kung fu stance, since he came to the UFC, when he used to look a lot more like just a boxer.
Yeah.
You know, so we've seen a lot of this kind of stuff, and we're going to, I think, contrast that in a bit with Chad Mendes, who seems to me to be a very, very utilitarian fighter. You know, not that McGregor doesn't have his substance, but there's flash and substance. And for Mendes, I think a lot of people have almost suckered themselves into thinking that because Mendes has no flash, that he is, somebody called him a predictable striker the other day. And that kind of confused me.
Yeah, I think that's the opposite of true. I mean, like there are, like, utilitarian is not the same thing as bland or not good. Just like flashy is not the same thing as great. I mean,
nor necessarily the same thing as ineffective or useless.
Yeah, I mean, like, have you watched James Muntasri at all, Connor?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I had the opportunity to see James Muntasri sparring at Black House a couple of months ago, and he's a really talented dude, and he could do real things in the lightweight division. Mm-hmm. But he does a lot of cool things, I think, for the sake of looking cool.
Yeah.
And like, there's some sort of method to his madness with the way that he throws flying knees and but he does a lot of really risky spinning stuff that is not real effective.
And we see a lot of that, not only in MMA, but in any combat sport. Like, we see a lot of boxers trying to shoulder roll punches now who have not been taught to do it and don't have it fully incorporated into their game. And we see a lot of MMA fighters, you know, who can barely put together a double jab, who are throwing spinning wheel kicks. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, the reason I bring this up is that I think it actually, like, this devotion to flash actually helps McGregor's goal, because he has a very commanding presence. It's difficult to, like, technically break down confidence and swagger and things like that. But it's almost like McGregor's spinning kicks are like it's like a dare. Like, you know, you're not going to counter this, so just back up, you know? Mm-hmm. It's like this big flashy move. He just brazenly throws a spinning kick out of nowhere. And Dennis Seaver is the only guy I've seen actually counter them. And it didn't really work that well for Dennis Seaver. You know, he got McGregor down countering him with a low kick once.
Yeah, that's the best that you can hope for. Right. That's intimidating. And also, I mean, again, I think it's important to note this because it really matters. Like, it's a big deal. McGregor is a huge featherweight. Yeah. He's absolutely enormous. He's listed at 5'9", and his reach is listed at 74 inches. But if your response to those kinds of spinning kicks or even the hook kicks or the like is to stay at the end of them, like, McGregor is going to be able to hit you long before you hit him. He's going to be able to put his straight left on you. So it has to do with keeping you at the end of keeping you in McGregor's range where you can't really hit him. We saw, how much did we see that from Dennis Siver, where Siver was just swinging at air and McGregor was just popping him right at the snappy part of the punch, pretty much at will. And it serves to take away space. Like, these are, like, they may look flashy and they may look cool, and we may think like, oh, haha, Conor McGregor wants to look cool. There's a lot of substance there. He's a very thoughtful fighter. He knows what he's doing. He's smart. He's smart with what he does, and he's got tremendous swagger.
I think the bravado of the kicks is part of the utility, whether he plans that or not. I mean, a guy who just throws like an incredibly telegraphed strike, who just does it and does it as a tactic to push you around because he knows you're not going to swing back at him, that's a tough guy to face. And, as we continue to talk about Chad Mendes, we're going to talk about a guy who's really made his name as a striker, counterpunching. And so if you're facing a guy who just kind of acts like he knows he's not going to be countered, yes, that means there may be an opportunity to catch him unexpectedly, but it also means that it's going to be very difficult to pull the trigger at certain times when you've got a guy who's just so confident in front of you.
Yeah. And I think that brings us to the other big evolution that we've seen in Conor McGregor's game, and that's increased use of his lead hand. Like, he's a southpaw, so, and normally he's fought orthodox fighters. Like, when was the last time we saw him against a southpaw? It's been a while, right?
I don't know. Holloway was southpaw at times. Dustin Poirier. And Brimage. Actually, he's actually faced a couple of southpaws. Dustin Poirier, that was an interesting fight.
Yeah, there was a lot to take from that, but McGregor does a lot of playing with his lead hand in not exactly the same way as a guy like Lyoto Machida, but a lot of hand trapping, a lot of playing, a lot of using it, a lot of flashing it, measuring, and then using it to obscure your vision. But increasingly, we've seen him explicitly looking to bat his opponent's hands down or grab his opponent's hands and then fire away. And we've seen him using it explicitly to obscure his opponent's vision, and then also actually throwing a jab, which he did not do much in the past.
No, not only his jab, but his right uppercut, both at long range and short range, has become an increasingly prevalent part of his game. That long sequence of combination punches we mentioned earlier against Dennis Siver, the right uppercut featured heavily. It was a great punch that he used from that little slight angle he had to sneak in between the gloves of the shelled up Siver. He got a little chancy, as he always tends to do, with letting his weight just stay on his front foot, and not like shifting with each punch or not being ready. Or he doesn't. There are like two ways you can throw a lead uppercut or a lead hook, right? Especially like when you start to throw it to the body. You can throw it the way you might throw a right uppercut, where you just kind of twist and generate torque off of your one hip with minimal weight transfer. It's all about the body torque. I've been told it sounds like we're saying twerk when we say torque, and now I keep noticing it. And then the other way is to rip that weight fully from front foot to back foot, which also has the benefit of pulling your head out of range. If you look up Layman Brewster's tutorial on throwing the hook, his is a right hook because he was a southpaw too. He teaches a really exaggerated weight transfer that lets you see that idea in motion. Kenny Weldon has a great series of boxing videos on weight transfer and on punches as well. And McGregor doesn't really seem to have the latter. So when it comes to, I think we've seen him being a lot more willing to throw those combinations of punches in the pocket, and those to me seem like that's a big chance area. When we have him measuring, jabbing, throwing long uppercuts, blinding with his right hand at range, like that's a very, very difficult tool of McGregor's to deal with if you're a short-armed guy like McGregor or like Mendes and you're waiting for a counterpunch opportunity. But it's just a tremendous amount of space you're going to have to cover there. Yeah, and he's not committing himself to any of those. He's using it to measure the moments for when he can commit. But when he stays committed on a combination, Dennis Siver cracked him with a counterpunch. A pretty hard one at the end of that round, right at the end of that flurry. And it didn't stun McGregor. The guy's got a chin, and I'm sure he's determined enough to get back up if he gets knocked down. But I have more faith in Mendes' counterpunching ability than I do Dennis Siver's, especially at this point in his career. So it's definitely...
Didn't Dustin Poirier knock out one of McGregor's teeth?
Did he?
With kind of a same time counter. That's Sean Sheehan, friend of the show, Sean Sheehan, and a very great Irish MMA writer. Sean Sheehan mentioned that. I think that
he hit him with a hard left. They traded left hands at one point, and it really knocked McGregor back onto his heels.
Yeah. That was, if I'm not wrong, I think that's what Sean said.
So I mean, he's fallen in on those punches, and when he does fall in, now that he's more content to throw combinations, he stays there. Once he's fallen in, he's in. So that's
he used to like in the past. McGregor was not really there to be hit very much. Like he would be in with the left hand, and then he would be out, and then as you came back, he forced you to follow him back out. And as he did this to Marcus Brimage a lot.
Yeah.
Then he would then he would get his angles going and get his counter punches going.
And he still does that occasionally. He did it to Diego Brandao. He slapped down his jab. He waited for the cross, stepped back to an angle, and fired the left hand over the top. It's a beautiful counter. It's very reliable. It's very safe. And we had this a slight argument, I guess, about the puncher's path idea that I had. McGregor turning into more of a brawler, more of a pure puncher, and less of a technician, same theme as my Golovkin piece, and whether or not that's true, if we look at the numbers of strikes thrown in McGregor's fights, like you can go and watch the footage and count it, he threw at least 3 times as many strikes against Dennis Siver than he did against, say, Ivan Buchinger. Both fighters gave him minimal trouble. He handled both of them, but his approach is obviously shifting towards a more staying around and hitting you. And Ivan Buchinger certainly never hit him with a decent counter. And Dennis Siver hit him with a couple.
Yeah, I mean, I went back and I looked at Buchinger's volume in that fight, and he was throwing maybe 6-8 strikes a minute. Like McGregor just purely overwhelmed him with volume. And he overwhelmed Siver, too. And Siver is normally a really quick-paced fighter. Siver will throw 12, 15, sometimes 20 strikes a minute. But McGregor took away his space and his ability to do that and just literally washed over him like a flash flood.
Yeah, but he throws a lot of punches in that process now, and so that's definitely, you sitting in the pocket with Chad Mendes. That's an interesting story. So let's take a quick break. We've been talking for like 25 minutes here, so we'll come back and talk about Chad Mendes. At the end of today's show, we may or may not have time for a heavy hands question, but we're gonna move on to the other part of this fascinating matchup in the next segment. Okay, wait, stop. Don't skip this break. I know you skip most of them. It's a podcast. It's not a radio show. You don't have to listen to the commercials. But if you follow my very simple instructions, you'll be doing a huge service to Heavy Hands, Pat, and myself. First, go to Stitcher.com or iTunes.com. You can use either of those services to subscribe to the show, which makes it really, really easy to listen to every episode and not have to go hunting for it on our confusing, badly designed website. Once you're there, give us a positive rating and a positive review. That means go to the little 5-star thing and click on the star all the way to the right. That's a 5-star rating. That's the best one you could possibly give us. And like 20 or 30 words about how you enjoy the show. It may not seem like much, but it's a huge help to us, and we really appreciate it. It helps us bring Heavy Hands to an ever-increasing audience, which is just good for everybody. So thank you for listening. Please take the time to give us a positive rating and review. Next time that you're on at your computer, at your phone, whatever, iTunes.com, Stitcher.com, search for Heavy Hands, give a positive rating and a review. Thank you. And now, back to the show. And we are back. And Pat, Chad Mendes, I think this is, because of all of the emotions that are going into people's predictions for this fight, there are a lot of details being sort of ignored on both sides of the equation. And I think people have this in their mind. People who hate Conor McGregor have this, and people who support him have Mendes in their mind as like the guy who's just going to hold him down, who's going to wrestle him. You know what I mean? Because they're like, oh, he's never fought a wrestler. He's going to hold him down. And then people who like Conor McGregor say, oh, Mendes is nothing but a wrestler. And both of those overlook the fact that Chad Mendes has not so quietly become arguably the best counterpuncher on the UFC's roster over the past 2 years. I mean, I think he might be. I'm trying to think of somebody else who's more consistently dangerous and prefers counterpunching as much as Mendes, and I really can't think of any.
Yeah, I think he may be the most defined counterpuncher on the
Sure.
UFC's roster. And also, just not to take the shine off of a segment about Chad Mendes, I do not ascribe to the Conor McGregor can't wrestle school of thought. And so this idea that there's going to be a lot of satisfaction to be had from Mendes going out there and just blast doubling Aldo for 5 rounds, or blast doubling McGregor for 5 rounds, that's not going to happen.
I hope it's not his plan, because I don't think it'll work out if that's all he's aiming to do. I mean Mendes himself, he said, "I'm going to knock him out, and if I can't knock him out, I'm going to hold him to the ground for 25 minutes." But I mean, like, we pretty much know at this point that Chad Mendes is content and quite capable of striking with people.
Yeah, and part of the reason that he's so comfortable as a counter striker is because he's so frickin' fast. He might be the best, even in a division with Jose Aldo, he might be the best pure athlete at 145 pounds.
He's kind of a freak athlete.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Aldo is probably still a little bit faster, but the fact that it's even a competition between Aldo, who's probably the best pure athlete on the UFC's roster, aside from maybe Yoel Romero or John Jones, like the fact that in that conversation, Chad Mendes is hanging out right there, like that should tell you a very great deal. And if you're going to counter, you either need to be a lot longer than guys, or you need to be a hell of a lot faster, in addition to having all of the requisite technical skills. Like being a lot faster, being a lot longer is what you need, because space is time. Space is time in fighting,
especially when you're a guy like Mendes who throws a lot of his counters as same time counters. Yes. I mean, he can block and counter with the best of them. He did that to Aldo. He did it to Guida at a couple notable times. But he likes to run guys into his counter punches while they're punching.
Yeah,
and you got to be fast if you've got a 66-inch wingspan.
Yeah, and Mendes is small. Mendes does not. I don't think Mendes actually cuts a lot of weight.
No, he said he cuts like 2 pounds.
Yeah, he's not a big dude. He's not a big dude at all. He is tremendously strong. He's tremendously fast. He's unbelievably explosive. Like, he shoots maybe the most technically perfect blast double in definitely at 145 pounds. One of the best in all of MMA. I'd say his only real competition on that front is Demetrius Johnson, or again maybe Yoel Romero. Mm-hmm. Like, he shoots these beautiful takedowns, but how does he do that? A, the speed, but B, timing. That's the other thing you need to be. The other thing you need to be a great counterpuncher. Mendes has it. Mendes has great timing, not just on his counterpunches, but also his takedowns. Again, given his lack of size relative to his opponents, Mendes relies really heavily on reactive takedowns, on letting you come forward and then ducking under and countering your forward movement and your strikes with his takedowns. It's the same principle that applies to his counterpunching, and he melds the two beautifully. How? Level changes. So if you try and walk forward onto your punches with Chad Mendes, Mendes might counter with a level change, and you don't know if he's going to duck under for the double, or he's going to come back up with that uppercut that he just about knocked Jose Aldo's block off with. In was it the 3rd round or the 4th round of that fight?
3rd round, I think.
Yeah, just absolutely blasted Aldo's face, and a lesser man than Jose Aldo would have been on the canvas seeing stars.
A lesser man than Jose Aldo wouldn't have knocked Chad Mendes down 10 seconds later.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, I think it's easy to underestimate Mendes's craft as a striker because he was one bad referee's call away from winning a national championship in wrestling. Mm-hmm. Like, it's easy to underestimate the craft that Mendes has in his game. But he's worked with some good striking coaches. He spent a lot of time working with Dwayne Ludwig. He's not working with him now. But the new guy seems to be working for Mendes. Like, I think it's hard to look at what Mendes has done and see some real deficiencies there.
As I understood it, I thought he was still kind of splitting time and doing some training with Ludwig. Is that not happening?
He did before his fight with Ricardo Lamas, but to my knowledge, he has not done that at all for this fight. I think probably because the notice was so late. Mm-hmm. He had been working in Sacramento. If he had a fight booked, I would imagine that he may have gone and spent some time there, but not for this fight. Ludwig won't be in his corner, and to my knowledge, they haven't worked together at all.
And he wasn't in his corner. To his credit, Mendes seems to have taken the lessons that Dwayne Ludwig bestowed upon him and run with them. Yep. He had a little difficulty with Ricardo Lamas, who is a badly underrated fighter, probably because he's so inconsistent, but that also means he's capable of some really good performances. And, Mendes suffered the fate that a lot of reach disadvantaged fighters suffer, but he also knocked Ricardo Lamas' block off 2.5 minutes into the fight. And so, we saw Mendes feeling somebody out and, yes, eating a little punishment because of it, but we also saw the depth of his counterpunching ability. And it's not just as simple as, this is where it really kind of grinds me that people would say he's a predictable striker. Because I've gained a lot of respect for the striking of Chad Mendes, especially since that Jose Aldo fight. I could not, for the life of me, have ever predicted that he would strike so competitively with Aldo throughout the bout. To the point where he was very close to, and had he not gotten knocked down with a left hook by Aldo, he probably would have won the first round. Especially because that last punch after the bell, you could arguably not score that. But he was really, really superior over Aldo for the first 3 minutes of the fight and had other just like flashes of brilliance. That says a lot to me because I have, of course, a lot of respect for Jose Aldo's striking ability. And so, for me, one of the things that defines Chad Mendes' abilities as a counterpuncher, not just the speed and the athletic potential that Pat already mentioned, but is his feinting game. I think he's a very, very consistent and effective feinter. And a lot of fighters throw feints, but don't really throw them convincingly. And Mendes is very good at selling his feints, probably because he's so athletic. He can throw just a fast twitch muscle movement out there and recover from it. Where, if you don't, like say soccer players, when they feint a kick, they don't just pretend to kick, they actually kick the ground behind the ball. Because the intent has to be there for a feint to be convincing to a good opponent. And Mendes' feints are just riddled with intent, which is, of course, backed up by the fact that you respect the movement of his arms because you know how friggin' hard he hits.
Yeah, he is one of the more tremendously gifted natural punchers in all of MMA.
Oh, yeah.
He really, really hits hard. You look at the list of the guys that he's knocked out, and and that's not a meaningless list of dudes to have put your fists on. You know, Clay, he was the first guy to knock out Clay Guida,
and I'm very impressed by that fight. I mean, that fight kind of gets written off because Guida's not a world beater of any kind. He's kind of on the downside, but Clay Guida's a very awkward man to strike with. Very, very awkward. And Mendes looked good striking with him. Nobody looks good striking with Clay Guida. Nobody does.
Yeah, it's brutal. And one of the really underrated things about Clay Guida is that he really has pretty good pressure footwork. Mm-hmm. I found that to be a really instructive fight for me in watching Mendes in watching Mendes's film and seeing and trying to get a sense for how he'll stack up with Aldo. That Guida is more or less a pressure fighter, and Guida spent a lot of time in that fight trying to back Mendes up to the fence where he would have a better shot. Still didn't have any real shot of taking him down and working from the top. So you get a sense for some of Mendes's footwork and some of Mendes's tricks in that fight, and then from there you could see how he applied those against Jose Aldo and Nick Lentz and Ricardo Lamas. What I really saw from that was tremendous lateral movement, and his athleticism is part of that. But also, you never see Chad Mendes get his back stuck next to the fence ever. It doesn't happen. I think you have to go back years to find a fight where Chad Mendes allowed himself to get backed up. That's tremendous cage awareness, and it's something that's going to be really, really important when he's fighting Conor McGregor. We talked already about how much McGregor wants to try and back you up. That's going to be a really difficult thing for him to do with a guy who's as quick laterally and who has those kinds of instincts.
And it comes down to the timing of some of those counters too. One example that I've used a couple times, I'll probably use it again when I write about Chad Mendes this week, that I just love is from the Clay Guida fight, from the start of the second round, where Guida, of course, in typical fashion, comes charging out of the gate. He runs at Chad Mendes, all kinds of crazy, erratic movement, and he starts sticking out his jab, because even a guy as crazy as Clay Guida uses a jab. And Mendes, as he is wont to do, he holds his right hand open near his chin. He catches that jab. He feels the pressure of it and realizes that Guida is close enough that with a small step, he can counter him. He takes that small step both forwards and to the left, moving outside the line of Guida's right arm. And as he steps, he connects with his little counter left hook. Kind of lands high on the head, but he connects cleanly with his knuckles. It's a good punch. And because of this little sidestep that's come along with it, Guida starts throwing back because Guida is happy to exchange. and his right hand misses. Mendes slips a little bit to the left, barely any movement, and it's enough to get out of the way of this punch, all because of the little angle on that counter's footwork. And I think that kind of says everything you need to know about how good Mendes is at avoiding being pressured. Because we see, and this is why I brought up the feinting, because how does somebody who throws as little volume as Chad Mendes consistently put his opponent's backs to the fence? It tends to be with feints, where he will force them back and force opportunities for counters, like he did to Ricardo Lamas. It was like 3 quick feints. Lamas thought he had him timed on a jab, went for a cross counter, and ended up running temple first into a counter right hand, as Mendes slipped and threw the punch simultaneously. But aside from the pressure, I think we really saw in that Guida fight how good Mendes can be off of his back foot. And that's what kind of sells me on the idea that he's more of a counterpuncher, defined as a counterpuncher, than he is really a pressure fighter who counters, because he doesn't need the pressure to make his counters work. You know, his style is more, I think, about the counter punches than it is about the pressure, and he's happy to utilize them no matter the ring craft circumstances. If he has to move forward and create counters, he will. If he has to retreat, he'll do that too. And it makes it a completely fascinating matchup, because we kind of know McGregor's going to come at him, but we also know that McGregor's capable at range too. So what direction is this fight going to move in? Who's going to push the other man back? Who's going to be forced to lead? It's a really, really tricky fight to predict because of that.
That's like the point that you raised at the start of that anecdote about that one sequence in that fight, Conor. It put so much when I read that article of yours, everything fell into place about Chad Mendes for me with that. Because one of the things that you notice if you look at Mendes statistically is that he's a tremendously accurate striker, which you rarely see from a guy who operates at the kinds of ranges that Mendes operates from. That's not a knock on those guys. It's just it's hard to land more than 30, 35, maybe 40% of your strikes if you want to operate generally outside the pocket. Kind of at the fringes of striking range, where you've got to kind of leap in with your shots. It's hard to land strikes from there. It just is. But Mendes is tremendously accurate, and he's tremendously accurate with his punches, which you see even less. You know, kickers from that range, you've got more margin for error, right? Yeah. Not so much the case with guys who are primarily punchers. So but what you mentioned there is that Mendes lets you measure the distance for him. Mm-hmm. And it's how Mendes gets away without throwing a lot of volume, is that he lets you show him where you are by consistently being willing to stand there and let you throw at him, because he's so confident in his sense of the range. He's confident in his ability to move his head. He's confident in his ability to block, to use that open right hand to catch the orthodox fighter's jab. Because he's so confident in that, it takes away his need to really measure all the time with his jab. He can figure out where you are. You're going to show him. That
kind of fits the idea of his style being that of a counterpuncher, right? That's a counterpuncher's jab. It is the other guy's jab. And that's really the crux of Mendes' style, is even when he's pressuring, he's making his opponent put themselves out there. You have to, most of his opponents feel compelled to stick their necks out when they fight Chad Mendes. It's either that you think you've bought in, or you think you've spied an opening because he's feinting at you, or because he's occasionally leading with punches or attempting takedowns, or you need to get him off of you, or you think you have an open target because you're pushing him backwards. Either way, his opponents are throwing the first strikes, and Mendes does a very, very good job of staying right on the end of their range until he feels comfortable almost stepping into them as they come forward. That's why a lot of his punches are so devastating. Not only is he obviously a very hard puncher, but timing is what you mentioned before, and timing is what makes his counters so destructive. If a right hand can have a meaningful impact, but as soon as you run into that right hand, it's going to knock you out. You're just going to, full body weight. Ricardo Lamas flung himself head first into that punch, and that explains a lot of why a punch to the top of the head can put a guy out as much as that punch put Lamas out. Jose Aldo ducked into the fake takedown to uppercut that Mendes rocked him with in the third round of their fight because he dropped his chin onto that punch. It really, really badly hurt him. Whereas the beautiful counter left hook that Mendes hit in the first round, it caught Aldo off balance, but because he wasn't running into it, he recovered very quickly. I mean, he was pretty much fine. So when Mendes is able to find those opportunities to get a guy to fall into his punches, or to get a guy chasing him, or to get a guy to really bite down and try to counter him, that's when he lands his most effective shots. And I think we're going to see those opportunities with Conor McGregor, but I think this fight's going to tell us a lot about how well Conor McGregor adjusts to adversity, how well he can adjust his striking style. Because I've kind of spelled this narrative of McGregor becoming a certain style of fighter and not really being able to avoid it. And I'm very interested to see if he can eat a counter or two from Mendes and realize, okay, I've got to fight at range now. I've got to stop pressuring. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to see that.
Yeah, I'm very curious. I'm really curious. I think, and coming up in the third segment here, that's exactly what we'll talk about, is how we see the matchup between these two guys playing out. It's a matchup we're super excited for. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you can't tell from the way we've been talking about it, but it's a tremendous fight, and I think that it's really interesting on a lot of different levels.
Yeah, definitely. So after this break, we'll have a couple of points on kind of synthesize all of the ideas that we've discussed here, maybe give our final predictions on how we think this fight is going to play out, and we will wrap up after this. Okay, so here's another way you can help us out. Go to your couch, lift up the cushions, and scrounge around in the creases for change, lint, like bent paper clips, like a thumbtack that you stab your thumb on and then you scream alone in your living room. Throw all the stuff out except the change. All right, now take that and deposit it into your bank account or your PayPal account. Head over to heavyhandspodcast.com and click on the donate button on the right side of your screen. Whatever money you just found, which you weren't using anyway, send it to us, all right? Because Pat and I will use it. That money helps us keep this show on the air and free of charge, which is great for you. It's great for us because that way we're making a little bit of money. The donations are a huge deal for us. So please go to heavyhandspodcast.com. Any spare change that you might have lying around, hit the donate button on the right side of the screen and send it our way to help us keep this show live. Thanks. And now back to Heavy Hands. All right, Pat. So I am going to launch the discussion by just putting it out there. I'm going to surprise you and not give you a chance to think about it. Who do you think wins this fight?
I think Chad Mendes wins it. I really do. And it has everything to do with Mendes' ability to mix up his takedowns and to run. And as we talked about at the end of that last segment there, about Mendes' ability to get you to run on to his punches. Mm-hmm. I think Conor, as we talked about this when we were breaking down McGregor's kind of evolution here, McGregor is more and more often now there to be hit. He's walking his way forward into the pocket. He's always kind of lunged into his straight left.
Yeah.
As he's trying to cut off your space, it extends his reach. And it's part of what makes him such a devastating puncher. It's part of why he gets so much weight behind that left hand. It's one of the most devastating single punches in MMA is Conor McGregor's straight left. But there are also risks associated with that. And I think that Chad Mendes' style is perfectly suited to attack that particular weakness. That McGregor gets all of his weight moving forward into that shot. His chin pops up a little bit. He doesn't do a tremendous job of hiding his chin behind his left shoulder as he throws that punch. He tends to rely, as he's throwing, on his length and the threat of his punch to keep you at the end of it. If you come into Conor McGregor's punches, I think you've got a really, really good chance of beating him. Now you just have to hope that McGregor doesn't adjust and try and draw you onto his backstepping counters. That's the adjustment. That's Conor. That's what you mentioned at the end of that last segment. I really see this as a battle of Mendes being able to bait the forward movement and then work his counter punches off of that, and more importantly, to work his takedowns off of that. Yeah,
and my question is whether or not Conor McGregor can resist mixing it up with Chad Mendes and coming at Chad Mendes. And I really think there is something to all of the talk of McGregor saying, no opponent, no style. This idea that he doesn't do a lot of specific preparation. I'm sure he's watched some tape of his opponents. Cathal Pendred, who also trains at SBG Ireland, has talked about watching tape merely to get an idea for his opponent's tempo or rhythm, just kind of watching it passively and having an idea of what you're going to be confronted with. I'm sure McGregor does something like that at least, but I think that Conor McGregor does think that the style he has can work against whoever he wants it to work against. And if that is indeed his mindset, he has a very difficult puzzle in front of him in Chad Mendes, one which he may not be mentally equipped to solve. I do think he has the ability to work with Mendes at range if he can sort of remain uncharacteristically patient and hang back and force Mendes to lead. At least sometimes the fight's going to become a lot more interesting as a striking battle. And Mendes' takedowns, as good as they are, they're almost always reactive. So if McGregor doesn't run into those double legs, automatically the fight becomes really, really competitive and interesting. That the first round, first 2 or 3 minutes, they're going to tell us a lot about where this fight is headed.
Yeah, I mean, the takedown bit is interesting, right? Because I mentioned before, like, I don't ascribe to the McGregor can't wrestle theory. I watched every single one of McGregor's fights. He can wrestle. He knows how to stuff takedowns. Like, this is a stupid meme that has come out of nowhere simply because we haven't seen him do it against elite competition in the UFC.
And I believe we pointed out a while back that another notable featherweight faced no wrestlers on his way to his first title shot, a man by the name of Jose Aldo, who happens to be arguably the best counter wrestler in the sport.
Yes, I mean, aside from the immortal Jonathan Brookins, if you want to count it,
a fearsome wrestler indeed.
Yeah, I mean, look, the fact that he hasn't done it doesn't mean that he can't. I mean, I think that people would be a lot more comfortable with it if they had seen McGregor do it before. But what I've seen says that McGregor is a perfectly competent defensive wrestler. Now, here's my caveat to that. It's not enough to be a perfectly competent defensive wrestler to stuff Chad Mendes. You have to be an absolutely elite, world-class defensive wrestler to stuff Chad Mendes' shots.
Well,
and Jose Aldo is.
And also, I mean, you know who else is actually a really competent defensive wrestler? Nick Diaz. Nick Diaz has actually, when he's committed to takedown defense, has actually done a good job of stopping takedowns. He did it to Sean Shirk in his first UFC run. He stopped George St. Pierre's takedowns later into the fight when he really started trying to stop those takedowns. You're like, oh, he can wrestle. The thing that has always been a problem with Nick Diaz, and this may be particularly prescient, as you brought up the McGregor-Diaz comparison earlier, is that Nick's offense has always dwindled when he has had to focus on stopping the takedown. And it really hurts a guy who is a sort of swarmer, a high-volume pressure fighter. It really hurts him to have to worry about what his opponent's going to do. And to not only have to worry about it, but to have to be worried about being taken out of his element in order to stop that thing. McGregor does not want to be tied up in a clinch. He does not want to be defending takedowns. He wants the guy to be backing up and eating punches, and he's happy to actually get like hit with a few counters. He's willing to incur that risk because if you've got a decent chin and a faith in it, you can keep swinging while the guy punches back at you, but you can't keep swinging when the guy gets down and gets in on your hips. It completely breaks the momentum of the style. And so
Conor, you son of a bitch, you stole my point. See, you like when we were doing our Mayweather-Pacquiao breakdown, you called me a son of a bitch and accused me of stealing your point. And
you
now
did steal my fucking point.
and now, well, hey, and now the tables have turned, and you know what? It sucks. I know how you felt. But the point about pace is an incredibly important one. One of the most salient facets of McGregor's game is the fact that he works as fast as he does, that he throws as many strikes as he does, that he'll routinely throw 20 strikes a minute. That more than anything else is what makes him so deadly. It's part of what makes Gennady Golovkin as deadly as he is too. Mm-hmm. We've run the comparisons between McGregor and Golovkin before, and I would imagine we'll do so again. But part of what makes those guys as deadly as they are is the pace. McGregor doesn't rely on it quite as much as a guy like Nick Diaz did. Diaz was first and foremost a swarmer. I think McGregor is a guy who occasionally swarms, if that makes sense.
No, I would agree with that.
He's not as defined by that. But still, at the same time, what makes McGregor so difficult to fight is that he's going to be throwing that much volume at you, that he's going to bury you under his output. But if he has to think before he throws, if he can't just loose that straight left and step forward with it, if he's got to worry about the reactive takedown, whether or not Mendes is actually shooting all of those times, or whether sometimes he's just showing the level change and then coming up with punches, or showing the level change and then backing out, and using that split second and as an opportunity to get away, that's a tremendous challenge for a guy like Conor McGregor. It's not just about the takedowns. It's not just about whether McGregor can stuff them. It's about what the threat of the wrestling does to the overall package of his game. That's a really good point that you brought up there, Conor.
Thank you, and I'm sorry to have taken it from you. But great minds think alike. Great minds think alike, Pat. And since I didn't give my prediction earlier, I may surprise some people when I say this, but my heart says Conor McGregor. Not because I like McGregor more. I think I've come across in this episode as someone who likes Chad Mendes' style more. I really like Chad Mendes' counterpunching. I love the whole package of his game. That's if I was going to root for a guy in this fight, it would be Chad Mendes. But I have this feeling about Conor McGregor that he is something more than most fighters. That he has, for example, the certain level of extra confidence and bravado and determination that makes Jose Aldo or John Jones such impressive champions. That they are just completely fearless and refuse to quit. And that will allow McGregor to confront the difficulties of the style matchup more easily than any other average fighter could, or any other great fighter could. He's a great fighter in his head as well as in actuality. So my heart kind of says that Conor McGregor is going to silence the haters, as it were, and prove that he can counter wrestle and that he can beat up a guy like Chad Mendes. I don't know why, but my head says Chad Mendes. If I look at this matchup, everything about it says to me Chad Mendes has a lot more clear openings and paths to victory than does Conor McGregor. And so I got to pick Chad Mendes, but I just have this feeling. I don't know, Pat. Feelings are notoriously unreliable, but I just have this feeling, which is why I was so excited for McGregor Aldo in the first place, because there's two guys with just unerring self-belief, completely unfaltering belief in themselves, determination to prove everyone who ever doubted them wrong, a refusal to lose a fight. Like Conor McGregor fights like every fight is as important as the last. He beat the shit out of Dennis Seaver as if Dennis Seaver was Jose Aldo. And honestly, that was a walkover fight. He could have come in unprepared and been like, whatever. No, he thrashed Dennis Seaver and seemed to want to prove that he could do it more viciously than ever before. And that's the kind of thing that Jose Aldo used to do. And that's the kind of thing we saw him pull out of his back pocket against Chad Mendes in his last title defense. So that makes me question the technical pick. But the technical pick has to be Chad Mendes.
Yeah, there's an aura of destiny surrounding Conor McGregor,
yeah.
and that's not just and it's not just hype.
No.
Like I've been on the McGregor train since the very beginning. I remember watching his last fight in Cage Warriors and thinking, "Wow, this dude is going to be something special." I remember his name on Twitter is @Caposa. He's a coworker of mine at SureDog. I remember him referring to McGregor as the Irish Nick Diaz when he was signed for that fight with with Marcus Brimage.
Yeah.
And I remember the excitement, and I remember saying to people before the Holloway fight, this dude is going to be really, really, really good. But I just think that this is one of those fights where, like, I don't think you can get away with not having trained takedown defense for all without having trained a tremendous amount of takedown.
And more than that,
defense
as you said, you can't get away with having a style that needs to be like as uninterrupted as McGregor's usually is.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that like it's gonna that Mendes is going to be able to shut down his volume, and that when McGregor can't throw, when McGregor is reduced to throwing an average of 10, 12 strikes a minute, that then Chad Mendes is going to have his opportunities. He's going to have his chances. When you can slow the pace down that much, when you don't get buried under that volume, then suddenly it looks like a much, much different fight. And to me, that looks like a fight that favors Chad Mendes.
Yeah.
Now, I wouldn't be surprised if McGregor knocked his block off in 30 seconds. Like,
no,
that
the
would
power
not surprise me at all.
The power of both of these guys is an ace up both of their sleeves. Like that changes a lot. I mean, there's nothing that will nullify a bad style matchup like earth-shattering power. And both McGregor and Mendes have that. McGregor may be the more natural puncher because he doesn't have to run his opponents into punches to really hurt them. He destroys guys on the end of his reach. So I mean, he hit Dustin Poirier with the first clean punch he hit Dustin Poirier with staggered him. The first one. Dustin Poirier is pretty durable. He's hittable, but he's pretty durable. And McGregor was the moment he realized he could throw this looping left hand instead of the straight and come around, catch Poirier on the ear, Poirier was on rubber legs. He hits very hard. So it wouldn't surprise me either if he just starches Chad Mendes right out the gate.
That's been a consistent thing that people have said about Conor McGregor. I saw a segment, I saw a written out interview segment, people from his old boxing gym in Crumlack in Dublin, where they were talking, when he was 13, 14, 15 years old, people were talking about how hard Conor McGregor hit. This is he is a special kind of puncher. The only outcome to this fight that would really surprise me is if McGregor submitted Chad Mendes. I think every other outcome is in play. Decisions for both fighters, knockouts for both fighters. I think a Mendes guillotine wouldn't surprise me all that much. He's got a great front headlock series. But I think at the end of the day, we should appreciate the fact that we have a matchup like this, that we have two incredibly special fighters in going head to head on the biggest card of the year that's stacked with other great fights,
competitive fights. Yeah, not just the last pay-per-view with names and stuff, but it's stacked with pick'em fights. It's great. Mm-hmm. So, okay. Well, thanks for joining us, everybody. And that was a lot of fun to talk about. Hopefully the fight will be just as fun, 100 times more fun to watch live. I have every faith that it will be. It will probably be a knockout. That's my feeling anyway. Two extremely hard punchers. Although you never know. Hendricks Lawler went to 5 rounds both times. Who would have ever guessed that? So, let's see. Coming up, I want to tell everybody before we wrap up, Pat and I are hoping to do basically a live broadcast for a UFC show. We're not going to do it for this one, but I want you guys to stay tuned and keep up with us on social media, because we are hoping to do a sort of like what Joe Rogan does in his podcast, The Fight Companion. We'll have to come up with our own snappy name for it, of course, but a lot of people have expressed the desire to hear us kind of breaking down fights and bullshitting in between them live. So I'm looking forward to that. I think we'll try to do that sometime in the near future. Other than that, Pat, what do you have coming out this week that people should have their eyes on?
Well, I've got my preview of UFC 189. I think this is I worked real hard on this one. Not that I don't always work hard, but I put
you gave it away. You gave away the game, Pat.
I put a really tremendous amount of effort into this one, especially trying to understand Conor McGregor's game better. So I've got that coming out. Also, I've got my first boxing preview on SureDog. I'll be doing kind of technical boxing previews on SureDog on Keith Thurman versus Luis Colazzo, which is also Saturday. So yeah, that's it. I'm off the top 10s. Connor.
Oh, just dipping your toes into nothing but analysis and previews now.
Yeah. Oh, and also I will be on Beatdown After the Bell after UFC 189 on Saturday with my man TJ DeSantis, talking about everything that goes down. So give us a listen, give us a call too. You'll be able to give us you'll be able to give TJ and I a ring.
Hopefully we get another great anti-gay marriage rant that you guys can discuss. Something like that.
Oh God, these are our listeners.
Let's see. What do I have coming out this week? Well, obviously McGregor versus Aldo. Versus Mendes. I will have a breakdown of both of these guys, a separate one. I am hoping to kind of take an interesting look at Conor McGregor's timing and his ability to catch opponents off guard. I think it's a really big facet of his game. It helps him take full advantage of his reach. So that's going to be coming at the end of this week. I will finally be doing a retrospective look at Mayweather versus Pacquiao. That should be coming out this week as well. And maybe the start of a training journal on badlefthook.com. I just returned to the boxing gym for the first time in ages, so maybe I'll be writing about that experience. More writers should go into the gym and get beaten up. It really gives you some good perspective. Would you agree, Pat?
I would. As somebody who has been regularly beaten up, I would say, yeah, it's not an unuseful thing.
Yeah, the coach asks me when I step in the gym, "Have you sparred before?" I said, "I've gotten beaten up a few times, if that counts." So it happens. That's part of the learning process. It's a return to pain and to happiness. It's a mixed bag. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. We hope you enjoyed our analysis of these fights. If you want to find us on social media, you can do so on Twitter. You can find me at BoxingBush, and Pat is at Patrick_Wyman. And you can also find us via email if you have questions or suggestions that require more than 140 characters and you don't feel like sending 7 tweets in a row. You can do that by emailing Conor at heavyhandspodcast.com. Check out both of our articles. Pat writes for SureDog.com, I write for BloodyElbow.com and BadLeftHook.com. I think that's everything. So hopefully...
Also, we're hosted on BloodyElbow.com.
We are hosted on BloodyElbow.com. Hopefully we have a fascinating post-fight show for you next week. I know both of us are hoping for it. All of you are as well. Thanks again for joining us. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.